Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are in some watershed stuff, I would think. Is it okay to call it that? We're talking about Moses' encounter at the burning bush. Wow. The things are developing quickly. So Moses has sees this, right? And it's an amazing thing. He sees this bush that's aflame, and yet the bush isn't getting burned up. And so, Vayomer Moshe. So Moses, again, look at how many times this word Vayomer, which always was getting translated as said, and here it just so clearly, so many times, it means think, right? Moses thought. I mean, who was he talking to? Right? Moses thought, Asura na, I will turn away, ve'er'eh, and I will see et mar'eh hagadol hazeh, at this great vision, mar'eh from ra'ah, to see, right? This hazeh, gadol, great, this amazing sight. Madua, why? Lo yivar hasneh, why doesn't the bush burn up? So we're happy to see Moses clearly had a good sense of curiosity. So, Asurana, let me turn aside. Asura mikan. So in other words, he was planning on going somewhere else or pursuing some other course, and he was turning away. That's that asur. The word, I believe, asur is also has the idea of to remove. By the word asur means forbidden, right? Something is asur. But anyway, it has to do with the thing that it's different. It's not what you can do. So I will turn away from here, mikan, lehit karev sham, to draw near there. So it implies a change of course, right? Vayar Hashem, and God saw, or Hashem, the Lord, Hashem saw, Isar lerot, that he was turning away to see. Vayikra elav Elohim mitoch hasneh, and God called out to him from the midst of the bush. Vayomer, and he said, in this case, we mean it, right? It's Vayomer, he said. Moshe, Moshe, Moses, Moses. So I just want to comment on the repetition of the name. And, when you fall in love with someone, their name becomes important to you. You play around with their name and just the associations. And I believe that this isn't just getting his attention, although clearly that's the main purpose here, but there's also some sense of endearment here too, that I feel is at least attached to it. But he is getting Moses' attention. Vayomer hineni. And Moses responds and he says, here I am. And that, of course, there's a reflection of Abraham, right? Who also says to God, here I am. I'm present.
And also, doesn't God use Abraham's name twice too?
I believe he might. I think in the case where he's about to slaughter Isaac, the angel calls out to him, I believe. Right.
It also says at the beginning of Vayikra, Sefer Vayikra,
Yes.
that the use of the word Vayikra, it implies affection.
It does. We actually did that because we have covered that. And it's a beautiful, beautiful Rashi on the opening words.
Yeah, calling out is drawing near.
That's right, right.
And you're right, it does say it in the Akedah, because that's the part I read on Rosh Hashanah, and I can hear the Rosh Hashanah trope in my head saying, Vayomer Avraham, Avraham, Vayomer Hineni. So yeah.
Yeah, just so lovely. By the way, yesterday was, 2 days ago, was Heschel's 50th anniversary yahrzeit, and there's some really good stuff out there these days on Heschel. There was a whole bunch of quotes that I can send off to people. A lot of quotes that are just really beautiful. And Heschel makes the point about the reason I'm mentioning this is that he talks in the sense of God calling out to us, which is in sort of a unique point of view of how God is actually calling out to every one of us. That's just part of, I think, Heschel's gift. And he's the one person I can identify, a philosopher who's also a poet. I know there are philosopher poets, but in reading Heschel, so often there's a sense of poetry along with the philosophy. At any rate, let's keep going. I think we're no Rashi on this. Vayomer. So God goes on and says, Al tikrav halom. Don't draw near to there. Don't draw near to there. Shal na'alecha. Slip off. Remove your shoes. Me'al raglecha. From off your feet. Ki hamakom asher ata omed alav. For the place in which you are standing. Admat kodeshu is holy ground. It's holy ground. And this again, these sort of phrases that I think are worth lingering on, at least in our own minds, and playing around with, the connotation of taking off your shoes because the ground is holy. And of course, the relationship of our souls, S-O-L-E, to the ground on which we stand. And somehow, being planted, perhaps removing any obstacles from our connection to the earth or to the ground, that there's a sense of respect, right? That's involved there as well. So there's, clearly I'm looking for symbolism and metaphors and things like that. But just the idea that you're in a place where it's not business as usual, that whole sense of that. So Rashi, shal, not a common Hebrew word in this context. Shlof, remove, cast off.
Well, if you remove your shoes,
yeah.
there's nothing in between you and the holiness.
Mm-hmm.
You're touching the holiness. If you have your shoes on, you're not.
Yeah.
There's that intermediate layer.
Right. But some couple of things. One is when people wore gloves, and even now, if people wear gloves and they are about to shake your hand, it's an act of respect to remove your glove and shake your hand without the glove on. So there clearly is some symbolic element to this kind of idea, because of course,
Direct touch.
yeah, right, exactly. And I want to go a step further with that, because it has occurred to me that in one way, I think a very important way, if you ask yourself a question, what's religion all about, right? You try to look at the big picture. And then I think it is a way of allowing us to have a relationship with the universe, to look at ourselves not just from an egotistical or selfish, and I don't necessarily mean this in a derogatory kind of way, but just in a cultural way in which the individual has become so important in modernity, to a point where we cut ourselves off from asking ourselves, wait a second, what's my relationship to the universe? Not just to my family, not to my job, not just to my friends, not just to those people I have to do business with, but in a very broad sense. And it's parallel, I think, to the question which I have known for a while now, which is, why was I born? Right? It's asking that question. And the way I try to formulate it more recently is, what significance do I have? In this vast, amazing, mysterious world, what's my place? So there is that sense of the individual, but it's an individual in relationship. And
Well,
so, yeah.
go ahead.
No, it's all right. I'm
Well,
good.
I was saying, as far as shaking hands, that came about to show that you didn't have a weapon. You have two empty hands reaching out to each other with no weapon. And, so if you apparently had a glove, there's possibly a knife or something in the glove. So that, and also hands symbolize, control, and you're offering that equality. But with feet, that kind of symbolizes foundation.
Yes.
The bottom of your feet, that's the foundation on which all of the rest of you can be in space.
Right.
And so because God's not asking him to get on the ground and kiss it, or to get on the ground and touch it with your hands. He's asking him to put his naked feet on it,
Right.
and to experience that holy foundation through that touch, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also think there's a certain humility involved too. That going barefoot is also that there's an immediate sense of humbling oneself as well. I also think actually about the weapon piece. I don't know. I'm not just so certain about concealing a weapon in your glove, but I know that shaking with your right hand is that indication. Because if you were to hold a weapon, it would probably be in your right hand, because most people are right-handed. So I think that you're right about the weapon issue, and that it's to show friendship and things like that. But it seems to me, the very act of taking trouble, right, of having to remove the glove, and that's not to necessarily deny what you're saying. I just feel the weapon issue is more, I think, an issue of the right hand, I believe. I could be wrong. I think
Many religions require that everyone take off their shoes. We're the only one that just lets the priests do it.
Yeah, or also, actually, they had to. It wasn't
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Well, okay, but we don't have to. Only
Right.
they do.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. So at any rate, in this particular situation, okay, I could take it once. There's another thought I have, and that is, if I'm right, and if removing your feet is, again, these kinds of things is an act of humility, then again, being in a place of holiness demands one be humble, one be modest, and have an attitude. Arrogance is just moves you away from it. You can't be holy and arrogant at the same time. They just don't go together. So just another thought there. So back into this, right? Verse 5.
By the way, there are whole
Yeah.
religious sects that that don't wear shoes, either are barefoot all the time or wear sandals,
Right.
and it's all based on this verse that we're reading right now.
I suspect so. Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a category of sainthood, and I'm blocking on the Latin or whatever is used, where it talks about this so-and-so in sandals, and that idea of wearing sandals as being that kind of act of modesty and holiness.
It's called discalciation.
That's it. That's the one. Right. Yes. Thanks. Do you want to say it one more time so I can hear better?
Discalciation.
Yes.
And ciation is C-E-A-T. Discalciation.
Thank you. Okay, so going on, so he gives examples of how this means to slip off. So in the book of Deuteronomy, where they're talking about manslaughter as opposed to murder, they give the example of a person who's chopping wood, and the head of the axe slips off, the metal part, nashal habarzel, and the metal slips off and kills someone. So, that there's no intent whatsoever to hurt someone, but it happens. And then another word, ki shal zetecha, that your olive trees will drop the olives, they'll fall off. Admat kodesh, holy ground. Who, that's the end of the phrase, right? Hamakom. So he's talking about that place. whether I'm thinking to myself, what's bothering Rashi here? Is he worried that he's going to that we might think that the whole earth, in that area, that locale, and he's talking about that specific place where the bush was burning, that is holy, was a holy place going on. So this is a very significant moment, clearly, right? This is where everything starts to change, right? It's going to change onwards. Vayomer. And he goes on to say, God goes on to say, Anochi Elohei Avicha, I am the God of your father, literally. But I think here you'll see that he's referring to the patriarchs, because he goes straight on to say, Elohei Avraham, the Elohim of Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, the God of Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, and the God of Jacob. So relatively recently, again, I feel like I have a better understanding, and I've shared this quite a lot because it came as for me at any rate, as a remarkable moment to understand that the distinction between Elohim and Adoshem, right, and the Hashem, and the idea of why it's Elohei, it has to do with the willingness of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to accept God's sovereignty. In other words, performing mitzvot, right? Consciously performing commandments in relationship to saying, I'm doing this because God has commanded me to do it, is the definition of saying that God is your Elohim. You cannot say God is your Elohim if you never perform mitzvahs. Does it mean you believe in God? Yeah. You may well believe in God. You may believe in a transcendent deity, in an idea of a transcendent ultimate being. You may well believe in that. It doesn't mean that you have a relationship with it. And the Elohim is that part. And so that's the reason why it doesn't say Adonai Avraham. It says Elohei Avraham. Because it wants to emphasize, the text wants to emphasize the notion of to what degree Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were lovers, how much they loved and were in awe of God to a point where it affected their lives on a daily, momentary, from moment to moment, sense of consciousness that God was there and that their life was responding to God. Yeah.
I think since Adon is also used to mean a lord, yes, in a non-God sense, that maybe then that kind of symbolizes the physical relationship, and the Elohim is the spiritual relationship, the part where it matters what you do, that's more than just that you're recognizing the power of the Lord, but right, that it matters to the Lord what you do.
Yeah. So I think there's that element. I don't know that I'd make the distinction based on spiritual or not so spiritual. I think that when we talk about Adon, you can still believe that God controls the world. That when we use this term master, right, Adon, master of the universe, that we believe that ultimately all things fall under God's creative control. So the reason we think, the reason we're capable of speaking, the incredible variety of color and shape of flowers, right?
Yeah. So my point is, I maybe didn't describe myself well, but that's okay. All physicality, yeah, as opposed to the relationship.
Yeah.
It's, it's the physicality of colors and beings and textures and existence and.
Yeah, but it would also be poetry and things like that. It could be that as well. I think the difference is this. In a sense, the Elohim part is the part we bring as human beings. That's the part we are capable of bringing. If it's your decision as to whether or not Hashem is, or Adonai is your Elohim. And when we say Adonai Eloheinu in the Shema, that's what we're declaring. And it's taken me years, I mean decades, to realize that it's a declaration of the willingness to admit or to accept or to struggle and strive to make God your Elohim.
And it's our Elohim
Yes, it is. Because we are
because we're including whoever needs to be included.
It's
Well, this is
Eloheinu,
why,
right?
Yeah.
this is why, by the way, I love the idea. And now I say it that way, right? For years, I'd say the Shema and try and find a deeper interpretation. And now I've arrived. And although I read it a long time ago, I never understood. I related to it, I should say. It didn't resonate. But when I say Shema Yisrael, I'm addressing Jacob. I'm addressing my patriarch. And I'm declaring to my patriarch the loyalty that I'm attempting, to have to Adonai.
Could when we say we, that it could be our family, our peoples, our, does it mean everybody, or is it a little less inclusive?
But I think you could
I
take.
like saying it for just myself, or saying it for, all of my circle.
I hear you. So this is
Yeah.
the way I'd like to understand it, because I don't want to be overly particularistic. And so I would say that anyone, whether they officially identify as Jewish or not, anyone who accepts Adonai in this way is part of this. And that's, in fact, I think, reinforced by the end of that statement in the Shema, where you say Adonai Echad. That what do we mean by that Echad? What do we mean by God's oneness there? And I really like to focus on the idea of it isn't just, I feel that being Jewish was an invitation. That was the invitation that my family and I were given. But that there are many religions now that are as legitimate and as beautiful and as powerful as the one that I practice. And that's part of the Adonai Echad. That's how I want to.
Okay.
So I'm really glad you brought this up, Golda, because that sort of allows me to share with you where I'm at these days, because I feel that's a glorification of God, is that it's not only about Judaism. Now, there was a time, of course, when Jews were despised, and for that reason, they had to somehow compensate for that, because they were fighting this broad sense of feeling despised by the surrounding population. So yeah, it's all right. Let's just keep going a little bit more and then just finish this up. I think we're actually on to the next verse. I think we read everything here. Yeah. Okay. Let's go to the next verse. Okay. And so yeah, we're reading it. She were in the middle of it, right? Elohi Yitzchak Elohi Yaakov. So this is, look, Moses hears God saying this to him, right? And you can put yourself in Moses' place, right? I mean, it starts off like the guy is just bowled over by seeing this bush doing what it's doing. It's just so unusual. And he goes over, and now he hears a divine voice speaking to him. However we want to try and understand what that mystical experience must be and what God is saying, right? Because here he is. We know a little bit about his background and how he's grown up to this point, and now he's hearing about a relationship. He's hearing from this divine voice as us talking about being God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And here's his response, right? And I think it's so understandable. Vayisater Moshe panav. Moses hid his face. Well, panav, we know means face, but in a sense it's saying he was cowering, right? He felt so exposed at that moment in that realization, right? And here we go to support what I'm trying to suggest. Ki yare, for he was fearful, he was afraid. That's how he felt, right? Mehabit el Elohim, from actually looking at God, right? It's way too close, right? To be in the presence of such greatness. And it just, knowing that just makes you feel so insignificant in a way, and just the chutzpah, right, of looking at God. Let's see what the Rashi is, if there's any. Oh, sorry, excuse me. He's saying all kinds of stuff on that are coming up in the computer. Nope, that's it. So let's stop here. I think this is a good place. Sadly, of course, this is it for the week and for the year, but there's just so much to do. So, okay. Well, saving this for next year. Stop the share. Okay.
Well, when we say God of Jacob, like you were saying in the Shema, as opposed to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or just Abraham.
Yes.
I mean, but does Jacob, because he's the third one, the third and last generation, does it kind of imply also the others? Or is it that God's relationship with Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob became more substantial and deeper, each generation? Why would we just use Jacob as opposed to Abraham or all three?
Right, right. I think you're asking a profound question, that one could possibly even write a thesis over. What happens is, we know that with Abraham, he had Ishmael, and also the other whole bunch of maybe 10 other children through his concubine, through Hagar. And then we also know that we have Esau. And for however we want to try and interpret that, the issue is, and of course the Bible is not silent about Joseph's relationship to his brothers, but I think the fact that there's this amazing reconciliation at the end of the book of Genesis, and there's statements that talk about how Jacob, with his wives, all of them were still loyal and close. So I think there's ambiguity going on here, but I think that we identify with Jacob as descendants of Jacob, and of course we're called Israel, right? And that's of course Jacob's name that Jacob's given.
Yeah, why don't we say that? Why does it not say "and the God of Israel"?
Well, we say Shema
As
Yisrael.
opposed to no.
Right.
In the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of
Right. Okay.
Israel.
So
Why not?
yeah.
Because it's after that.
Right. So there are times when it does say Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, but you're right. Most times it seems to say Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I think that it has possibly to do with the notion that there's more than one take on what Jacob represents. Number one, I think of all the patriarchs, Jacob is the most human. Okay, he shows the most human failings, but there's something else about Jacob and the story of Jacob is we see development, we see character development all the way. All right, yeah, I do see we have a minion. I think I'm going to I think I'm going to stop the share, or stop the recording, and we'll go ahead and make Kaddish.